Hello, welcome to episode 43 of Thought Bubbles, sparkling insights into community engagement. Today I'd like to talk about activism, and more specifically, am I an activist? Are you an activist? What actually is an activist? And the reason I want to do this is because Engage to Act, which is a global collective of individuals who are committed to progressing high quality community engagement, of which I'm one of the founders, have announced our theme for Global Community Engagement Day, which takes place every year on the 28th of January. And the theme for this coming Global Community Engagement Day on the 28th of January 2019 is going to be engaging with activists. And so we're inviting people to submit blogs, to record videos such as this, to send us sketches, to write poems, to sing songs, to do whatever they want to do on the topic of engaging with activists so that we can all learn something from each other. The reason I want to talk about this a bit more this week is that our Prime Minister here in Australia, Scott Morrison, has rather controversially criticised young people who were planning to strike from school this week in relation to climate change. And he has said that he believes they should spend more time learning in schools and less time on activism. And so this is really great timing for us to say, well, okay, what role does activism have to play in our communities and our society? But first, the question that I would like us all to think about is what actually is an activist? And I'm starting to think about this in relation to myself. Am I an activist? So the first thing I've done is done a quick Google, what is an activist? And the basic definition of an activist is a person who campaigns to bring about political or social change. Okay, but that's quite a big, broad definition. And what do we actually mean by political and social change? And how do you actually go about doing that? What actually is a process of activism? On vocabulary.com, there's a bit more of a detailed definition. An activist is a person who campaigns for some form of social change. When you participate in a march protesting the closing of a neighbourhood library, you're an activist. Someone who's actively involved in a protest or a political or social cause can be called an activist. Okay, so still talking quite specifically about marching, and I think I've only ever been on 2 marches in my life. Is that the core of me being an activist? I don't know. So Wikipedia has a fantastic page on activism, and they talk in a lot more detail about what activism is, as well as some historical context. But in relation to a definition, they talk about activism consists of efforts to promote, impede, direct, or intervene in social, political, economic, or environmental reform with the desire to make changes in society. Now, I quite like that. That's getting a bit more specific. It talks about forms of activism can range from writing letters to newspapers, petitioning elected members, running or contributing to a political campaign, or preferential patronage, in other words, boycotting particular businesses, which is what they call economic activism. It also talks about activism being performed on a day-to-day basis by many people, including these days things like activism through art, which they call artivism, computer hacking, hacktivism, and of course, as I mentioned, economic activism. What I like particularly in the Wikipedia article when I'm thinking about what is an activist, I like that it references the most highly visible and impactful activism often comes in the form of collective activism. So in other words, when a group of people get together and want to make a change for those reasons we talked earlier, social, political, environmental, economical reasons. It talks a bit about that collective action being purposeful. And when it's organised and when it's sustained over time, it becomes known as a social movement. And this is where it starts to get a bit more interesting, doesn't it? Because it's not just about activism, it's you're actually creating movement and you're making change by working together to put your point forward. It talks about historically activists using literature, pamphlets, books, but nowadays, of course, we've got social media playing a big role in activism. And I think this is where I start to question, am I an activist in some of the things I share on social media? Anyway, I'm going to leave it there, but I'm going to do a few more thought bubbles about activism on the run-up to Global Community Engagement Day. But I would love to know your thoughts as to whether you think you're an activist and why, whether you think I'm an activist and why, and again, also what you think a definition of an activist is in 2018. See ya.